Hello, my name is Jackie Geringer McDermott, and we are recording live from the English Valley History Center in North English, Iowa on November 9th, 2024. This diary or journal was written by my great-great-aunt, Mary Elizabeth Claypool Wade, who was known as Libby Wade. She was my grandmother's aunt and the matriarch of our very, very large family. Libby lived a half a block east of Main Street in a little house on Oak Street in North English, Iowa, until near the end of her life in 1959. I don't remember her, but she knew me as a baby. Downtown North English was also the center of my life as I grew up. I would like to introduce you, page by page, to the cast of characters from North English, Iowa. January 7th, 1946. High water in different parts of the state. Kidnapping of a Chicago girl, a year old. Found her dismembered body in the evening. Mr. and Mrs. Bickford were here for a while. Mary Regsager was here in the PM. Temperature was moderate. Lloyd and Lucille Bickford were friends from town who evidently came to visit. Mary Regsager was a friend who likely came to do needlework with Libby. January 8, 1946. Colder, 24 degrees this morning, cloudy. A wedding at the Catholic Church, Emmett Agnew and Miss Armstrong. Russell went to Cedar Rapids for building blocks. Lena is okay, she says. The WSCS met at Alice Van Auken's installation. I found a clipping from the wedding of Veronica Agnew and Bernard. Her maiden name was Veronica Armstrong. They got married at the Catholic Church in a double ring ceremony on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock in the morning. This was the daughter of her, let's see, Veronica was from Watshire and Emmett was from the North English area. His mother lived across the street from Libby. So one of the things I do is I go and I use the North English record and look at it, and it tells all the different things that were going on that week. And as I do my research, I've really started to rely pretty heavily on the North English records of the past to learn things. You might remember from last week's installment that Lena was burned when the gas stove exploded. Back in those days, gas stoves had to be lit by turning on the gas and putting a match to the gas, and there was not safety features to prevent explosions like we have on modern stoves. When I was looking at the articles on the Agnew-Armstrong wedding, I ran across an article on the explosion. Burned in an explosion. Mrs. Warren Wade suffered burns about her face, neck, and arms, and 2 windows were shattered in the Wade home when the oven of the stove exploded Saturday morning. Her daughter Phyllis had used the oven earlier in the morning, and when Mrs. Wade attempted to light the oven burner later, the explosion resulted. The cause was laid to a leaky connection. You might also remember from last week that Libby's son Russell worked for the Home Lumber Company just a block away. I looked in the newspaper for an article about the WSCS meeting at Alice Van Auken's, but there was no story, although there was an announcement the week before that the group would be meeting. WSCS stands for Women's Society of Christian Service, which is a predecessor organization to the United Methodist Women, or United Women in Faith. The Women's Society of Christian Service, or WSCS, was a Methodist church ministry for women to help the women grow in their Christian faith and unite them in service. The WSCS's activities included discipleship and nurture, outreach and social concerns, missions, and witness and evangelism. January 9th, 1946. Bertha was here a while. They're expecting Donald home. Russell went to Williamsburg for a county meeting honoring World War II vets at the Legion. We put beef in the locker, 72 pounds. Bertha Geringer was Libby's niece and my grandmother. Bertha's own mother had died in 1930, so Libby was the matriarch of her family. Grandma Bertha was the one who instilled in me my great love of history. She, like Libby, was very, very proud of her family heritage from the Carters and Claypools, who were our ancestors who came to Iowa County after the Civil War and settled north and east of town in a settlement called Yankee Point and a ghost town called Carter, Iowa. Yankee Point Cemetery is our family cemetery in that area, and the land for the cemetery was given to the township by Libby's father. You might have noticed that Libby said they put beef in the locker. Families did not have home freezers in those days, or even refrigerators with freezers in those days. If you had meat you wanted to keep, you took it uptown and put it in the locker. From what I understand, there were little baskets that could be rented by each family to keep your frozen food. The locker was in the last building on the north end of the main business block at the corner of Oak Street and Main Street. The locker was owned by Allen Ione Johnson. January 10th, 1946. Donald and Dorothy were here. He got home last night. Installation of Rebecca and IOF tonight. I think I will go. Warm and nice here today. Lena was here a while. Donald Geringer was Libby's great-nephew and my uncle. Dorothy Geringer was his wife. Here's a picture of them. That's not my aunt and uncle. That's my Uncle Donald and his brother Glenn. They were both in World War II. There was a column named Yanks in the Ranks on the front page of the newspaper. It said, Corporal Donald Geringer and PFC Lynn Popham arrived home last week. These two North English boys had been stationed at Camp Lee, Virginia, and both were discharged on January 8th at Fort Meade, Maryland. Rebecca and IOF, which was the International Order of Oddfellows, were in the same building as Johnson's meat locker that I just mentioned. Only those meetings were held upstairs. I found an article about that, and this is from our first 150 years, which is our big history book. If I get the picture over this way. Written by Scott Romine and other people in 2004. In this photo in the late 1940s, we can see the community locker service owned by Allen Ione Johnson and Sampson's Market, a grocery store owned by Will Sampson. What the photo doesn't show, however, is the old Oddfellow and Rebecca Hull on the second story. North English Lodge number 325, International Order of Oddfellows, was one of the largest fraternal organizations in the community, with a charter that was issued on October 1st, 1875. They shared their lodge quarters with the Iowa Rebecca Lodge number 355, a ladies' aid society that received its charter in April 1896. And just behind this building in the first block of Oak Street is where Livy lived, so it was real handy for her to go up to the meetings. Marengo Lodge did the installing. There were about 100 present. This is January 11th, 1946. Cloudy today, rain and snow, freezing. High water all over the state. Strikes in all industries, getting bad. I did find a newspaper article about the installation, and it actually was a really long, involved article. It tells all the people that were put into offices. One of them was her son-in-law, Wayne Kurtz, and her daughter-in-law, Lena Wade, and of course Wayne, her son, Wayne Wade, had an office. So it was actually very interesting article about the Marengo people coming over to do the installation of the lodge members. January 12th, 1946. Bright sunshine but cold. Temperature 22 degrees at 4 p.m. Mr. and Mrs. Cram went to Wisconsin and left their canary with me. Jack Claypool got home today. Lyle is at Wayne's. Walter is coming home tonight. Belva and Frida went to Marion to meet him. From Yanks in the Ranks, Sergeant Jack Claypool arrived home last week following his discharge at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Jack spent many months in New Guinea and the Philippines. And here is a picture of Jack Claypool. John Harry Claypool, or Jack Claypool, was the grandson of Libby Wade's brother, Verner, or Verney, and his wife, Minnie Claypool, and the son of her nephew, Harry Joe Claypool. So Jack Claypool was Libby's great-nephew. I never met Jack myself. His brother was Don Claypool from South English, and his sister was Alberta, or Bert Kaufman Claypool Kaufman, the wife of Larry Kaufman of Williamsburg, Iowa. Jack was the uncle of my friends who grew up in North English, including Wanda Claypool, Carolyn Claypool, Debbie Claypool, Gary Claypool, and Suzanne Claypool. Jack was also the uncle of the Kaufman boys from Williamsburg, Tom Kaufman, Dave or Red Kaufman, and Mike Kaufman. Mike Kaufman now lives in the same town as me, which is Belle Plaine, Iowa. Mike always calls me Cuz, and Aunt Lib was our mutual great-great-aunt. Jack Claypool married Evelyn Bear from Keswick, and in 1959, they moved to Mountain Home, Arkansas, to live and run a resort. Jack's hobby was horses and mules. Jack passed away in Arkansas in 2010 at the age of 88. He was the father of my friend who does genealogy with me, Shirley Claypool, and her siblings, Jill, Jackie, and Jerry. Jack was just riding home today from World War II, and as I looked in the newspaper articles, I discovered that many soldiers were making their way back to North English in 1946. Walter was her grandson, who we knew as Bud Wade. He was in the Navy and stationed at Great Lakes. Frida was his wife, and in the future, she will be a longtime teacher at North English Elementary. Belva Wade Yoss is his sister. January 13th, 1946. Walter went to Frida's folks and to Ottumwa. He is to return to Great Lakes. Wayne was here a while. Lena and Sadie Wetherill went to Millersburg to see Mrs. Laura Wilson. She is to go to the Odd Fellows home at Mason City soon. She is 86 years old. January 14th, 1946. Ira died on this date 17 years ago. It was 26 degrees below zero the day he was buried. I will never forget that time. Russell got his new Ford today. Lee Carter is staying with us tonight. Received a Christmas card from Benton Geringer today from Yokohama, Japan. Ira Hinkle was her uncle. He was her mother's younger brother, who had always lived nearby to her mother, Anne Mariah Hinkle Claypool, since his own mother had passed away at a young age. Benton Geringer was my Uncle Doc Geringer, who farmed and lived near Williamsburg. Here's a picture of my Uncle Doc. January 15th, 1946. Harold got home today. He will have 30 days at home and 7 days travel time. Study group meets at Mrs. Newberry's. Lee Carter stayed here last night. Mr. Cram got home and got his bird this morning. They had a nice time in La Crosse. Harold, whose nickname was Stub Wade, was her grandson and also in the service. From the Yanks in the Ranks column in the North English Record, Harold Stub Wade, MM3C, came in Tuesday from Seattle, Washington, to spend 30 days with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wayne Wade. He reports back to Seattle, where he will be assigned to the decommissioning school there. And I've got a picture of, this is Harold and Walter, as we knew them, Bud and Stub Wade from North English, Iowa. And this comes from the Veterans History book that they have at the library. Mrs. Clara Newberry was a friend from town, and the study group would have been a religious group. Mr. Cram was Bert Cram. That concludes the diary portion, and now I'm going to tell you the correspondence of the week. This week we had over 3,600 people open our podcast. Many thanks to all my friends who have liked and shared and commented on our broadcast. I had a note from Sue Walrab, who was Suzanne Kurtz when she lived in the English Valleys. She was Libby Wade's great-granddaughter, and she said, "Jackie, you did a great job, and not just because you were sharing about your/my family. This is a really super thing to do. I look forward to the next installments." I also had a note from her sister, Catherine Kurtz Rogers, who was Kathy Kurtz when she went to school here. "Your cousin, John Geringer, was a classmate, class of 1966. My mother had great-grandma Wade's journals, and I read those from 1948 on. I remember her sitting in a chair by the window, surrounded by writing materials. She shared history through that window and passers-by. She had the best hollyhocks and taught me how to make a flower girl from the blooms. Great memories. Thank you for sharing her with listeners." Vicki Johnson writes, "I'm Vic and Lucille Van Dyke's granddaughter. I remember Libby Wade very well. She had bridal wreath bush all along the front garden. I love the fragrance. I planted several of them as an adult, all because of walking past her house many times in the 1950s, a memory that endures to this day." I know there are several references to flowers and gardening and cooking and preserving foods in the diaries, which we will discover in the future. Margot Johnson Redlinger also writes, "I just stumbled onto this as I was scrolling through Facebook. Very interesting. I remember Libby's little house. We moved to town in 1954 on Boland Avenue. We were catty-cornered from the old Catholic church. My parents bought the house from Mrs. Green. I was in 7th grade. The diaries or journals were given to the English Valley History Center by Glenn and Hazel Cobb. Libby Wade was Hazel's grandmother. Hazel said at that time, 'I love my grandparents, but Grandma was just it.' I have very much enjoyed studying and learning about the family over the years and hope to learn even more in the future." Hazel Cobb said that the diaries are to be kept at the English Valley's History Center. Here they are. There's a box that they're in, and it says Mary Wade Diaries on it, and they keep it in the kitchen and the cupboards. And the first book from 1946 is small like this, and it was an old book that her sister-in-law had, and she turned it into a diary. And then for future years, there's ledger books like this. This one is 1950, and then other years they are in just packets like this, and they're at the very end. There's some loose leaf ones that are like this that we have to organize yet. There's a possibility that there's more journals in existence. If you have any materials like that or any other pictures or items about Libby, please let us know so that we can make copies. We are also looking for a picture of Libby's house. It was in the first block of Oak Street, east of Main Street, on the south side of the street, across the street from Bill and Jean Kaufman and Lowell Churchills. Our acquisition of the week is a ledger book. This was given to the English Valley's History Center by Suzanne Moffett. We're not quite sure how Suzanne had it in her possession, but it was a ledger book written by Keith Kirkpatrick. We noticed that at first we thought it was for his personal record keeping, but some of them have also said that he had a creamer out. So it might have been for that. And it's very well written, and it talks about all the different disbursements and stuff. I thought that was very interesting. And Keith is the father of my childhood and longtime friend, Helen Kirkpatrick Schweetert, and her sister, Mary Kirkpatrick Anders. Her mother, Marilyn, was the owner of Kirkpatrick Variety, and Keith worked at a Manor Refrigeration. They lived on West Clark Street in a green house, and I often stopped by there on the way to school to meet up with Helen. Our display of the week. I'm going to move the camera just a bit so you can see it better. Right here. I'm going to have to lift it up, I guess. This is Mark Claypool's letter jacket. And we have many letter jackets here. I'm going to put it down because it's heavy. The English Valley, this one belonged to Mark Claypool. Mark was younger than me, and he excelled in sports. Mark told me he was going to leave it to his family, and then he decided the best place for it would be at the English Valley History Center. And you might have noticed the school colors on it. We have 6 letter jackets: Jane Ackerman's, Mark Claypool's, Rick Lown. There's a 1943 that belonged to Stan Lown, and also one of Dr. Larry Miller's. They got them all hanging on the wall behind me here. The History Center is open on Saturday mornings from 7 to 10 for coffee, and there's several people that come here on a regular basis. Alan Ackerman, who's on the board, Dan Best, my brother Lou, Susie Allison Lundberg comes a lot, and Dave Jackson, whose idea was the History Center in the first place. And saying that, being said, I haven't time for another new feature this week. It's called Alan Ackerman Says. Alan Ackerman is the youngest of the Ackerman children from North English. The Ackermans only arrived in North English in the 1960s when their dad, Phil, came here to teach high school. But Alan has been paying attention to history of the English Valleys ever since he was born almost 60 years ago. And now Alan is on the board of the English Valley History Center. Alan Ackerman says that the correct pronunciation of the school and of the History Center is English Valleys. English Valleys was a name suggested by Dr. Larry Miller when he was on the school board, and they were ready to name the school district. He suggested English Valleys because there are many river valleys of the English River in our district. So it's called English Valleys Community School District, and this building is the English Valleys History Center. And I'd also like to remind you that coming to the English Valley History Center on November 17th is Black Oak Films with Jacob Glandam. Jacob Glandam graduated from English Valleys in 2019 and went to Indian Hills and William Penn, and now he's self-employed doing a variety of things from film production to digitizing media. On Sunday, November 17th at 2 p.m., Jacob plans to talk about his new company, Black Oak Films. He will discuss some of the fine projects he has created for our communities. This young filmmaker has already dazzled many in our community with his fine films showing our lives in our part of Iowa. In this program, he intends to tell you about this new enterprise and many interesting subjects he has filmed in our region. Jacob has already created a highly praised documentary on Watcher, Iowa, and many have enjoyed his film on the English Valleys Care Center. He recently completed a video on Gritter Country School, and there are other small projects he has worked on. Most recently, he has helped with a film about Oskaloosa. He will also talk about future projects, including his short film, Digitized. He plans to show a scene from his Watcher documentary and other projects too, as they capture the world we live in here in this part of Iowa. This is Sunday, November 17th at 2 p.m. at the North English History Center. We'd like you to come and see that program. And I'm also looking very forward to seeing Jacob so he can help me get more technical stuff for my podcast in the future. We'll see you later from the English Valley History Center.